Officer Luke Grayson was known for his no-nonsense demeanor and dedication to the job. A seasoned cop in the small town of Blackwood, he had seen his share of unsettling incidents. But nothing could have prepared him for the events of October 13th, a night that would change his life forever. It started with a routine patrol down a stretch of road that locals called Dead Man's Pass. The name had roots in an old tragedy, a school bus accident decades ago that claimed the lives of several children. The road was notoriously foggy at night, with thick mist rolling in from the nearby marshlands. Superstitious residents avoided it after dark, but Grayson wasn't one to entertain ghost stories. As his cruiser rolled along the isolated road, Grayson kept one hand on the wheel and the other on his radio. The dispatcher's voice crackled through. Unit 5, we've got a 1050 at mile marker 12. Caller reported a vehicle off the road. Unknown injuries. Copy that, Grayson replied, flipping on his siren. The clock read 10:47 p.m. as he pulled up to the scene. The vehicle, a battered sedan, was lodged in the ditch, its hazard lights faintly blinking through the dense fog. Grayson stepped out, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The first clue. "Hello?" he called out, approaching the car. The driver's seat was empty, but the windshield bore a spiderweb of cracks, and the airbag had deployed. Blood smeared the dashboard and the driver's seat. Grayson felt a chill creep up his spine. Whoever was driving was injured, possibly seriously. Grayson radioed in. "Dispatch, this is Unit 5. I've located the vehicle, but there's no sign of the driver. Looks like they wandered off. I'm going to search the area." "Copy that. Unit 5. Be careful out there," the dispatcher replied. Grayson scanned the ground with his flashlight and noticed footprints leading away from the car. The prints were uneven, as if the person had been limping. He followed them into the woods, his breath visible in the cold air. The whip cut. The forest was eerily silent, save for the crunch of leaves under Grayson's boots. The trail of footprints seemed to go on forever, winding deeper into the woods. Then he heard it, a faint voice. "Help! Help me!" Grayson froze, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. The voice was distant, but unmistakable. "Police!" he shouted. "I'm coming to help!" The voice didn't respond, but it repeated the same plea. "Help me!" Grayson quickened his pace, his heart pounding. He reached a clearing and stopped dead in his tracks. In the middle of the clearing stood an old, decrepit cabin, its wooden walls covered in moss. The footprints led directly to the front door. The cabin Grayson approached cautiously, his hand resting on the grip of his holstered weapon. The door creaked open with a slight push, revealing an interior lit only by the moonlight streaming through broken windows. "Hello? Is anyone in here?" The air inside was stifling, carrying the metallic tang of blood. Grayson's flashlight illuminated a trail of crimson streaks leading to the corner of the room. There he found a woman huddled against the wall, her face pale and her clothes soaked in blood. "Ma'am, are you okay? What happened?" The woman looked up, her eyes wide with terror. "It's coming," she whispered. "What's coming?" Grayson asked. But before she could answer, a loud thud echoed from the back of the cabin. Grayson drew his weapon and pointed his flashlight toward the sound. "Who's there? Show yourself!" There was no response, but the thudding grew louder, more insistent. The presence. Grayson stepped toward the sound, his gun at the ready. The woman behind him began to sob uncontrollably. "Stay here," he told her. But she grabbed his arm. "No, don't go back there," she pleaded. Grayson hesitated but pulled away. He had to investigate. He moved deeper into the cabin, the floorboards creaking under his weight. The back room was empty, save for a trap door in the floor. The thudding sound was now deafening, as if something was pounding on the underside of the trap door. Grayson opened it cautiously, his flashlight illuminating a set of stairs leading into a pitch-black basement. The air that wafted up was putrid, reeking of decay. "Police! If you're down there, come out now!" he shouted. The pounding stopped. Grayson descended the stairs slowly, his flashlight revealing the horrors below. Chains hung from the walls, some still smeared with fresh blood. A makeshift altar sat in the center, surrounded by strange symbols scrawled in red. And then he saw it, a figure crouched in the corner, its back to him. "Turn around," Grayson ordered. The figure slowly turned, revealing a face that wasn't human. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. The aftermath, Grayson fired his weapon, but the figure lunged at him with inhuman speed, knocking him to the ground. His flashlight went spinning, and the basement plunged into darkness. Back at the station, when backup arrived at the scene, they found Grayson's cruiser parked near the cabin. Inside the cabin, they discovered the woman, alive but in shock, and no trace of Grayson. The basement was empty, the altar gone, the trapdoor sealed. Locals say that on foggy nights, you can still hear Grayson's voice on the radio, calling for backup that never comes. Deputy Samuel Carter had spent 10 years patrolling the quiet streets of Bridge Hollow, a small Midwestern town where nothing significant ever seemed to happen. It was a peaceful, if uneventful, life. That was until a late shift, on a cold November night, shattered his sense of normalcy. The call came in around 11:15 p.m., a frantic voice on the other end of the line. "Help me! There's something on Route 23. It's chasing me." The line went dead before the dispatcher could get more information. Route 23 was notorious for strange incidents, unexplained accidents, eerie sightings, and vanishing travelers. Some locals whispered about a cursed stretch of road, but Carter dismissed such stories as mere folklore. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I'm responding to the call on Route 23, Carter said, starting his cruiser and heading toward the highway. The empty road. The highway was eerily quiet, shrouded in a thick fog that seemed to cling to the ground. Carter's headlights cut through the mist, but the visibility was poor. He scanned both sides of the road, searching for any sign of distress. About 5 miles in, he spotted a vehicle pulled over on the shoulder. Its hazard lights blinked weakly, and the driver's side door was wide open. Carter parked his cruiser behind the car, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped out. The cold night air bit at his face as he approached. The car's interior was empty, but a purse lay on the passenger seat, and the keys were still in the ignition. "Hello? Is anyone out here?" Carter called, his voice echoing into the fog. That's when he noticed the footprints. A set of bare footprints led away from the car and into the dense forest lining the highway. They were small, almost childlike. But what struck Carter as odd was the spacing. Whoever made them had been running. Into the woods, Carter hesitated. Every instinct told him to call for backup. But something about the scene pulled him forward. He followed the footprints into the woods, the beam of his flashlight dancing across the trees. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became. The hum of the highway faded, replaced by an oppressive silence. Even the usual sounds of the forest, chirping insects, rustling leaves, were absent. "Hello?" he called again. A faint sound reached his ears, like someone whispering his name. "Carter!" He froze, his heart pounding. The voice was soft, almost playful, and it seemed to come from all around him. "Who's there? Show yourself," The whisper came again, this time closer. Carter. The encounter. Carter swept his flashlight in a wide arc, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. That's when he saw it, a figure standing about 20 feet away. It was a woman, barefoot and dressed in a thin white nightgown that looked out of place in the freezing weather. Her back was to him, and her hair hung in tangled strands down her shoulders. "Ma'am, are you okay? Did you call for help?" Carter asked, stepping closer. The woman didn't move. "Ma'am, I need you to turn around, slowly," he said, his voice firm. The woman began to turn, but as her face came into view, Carter's stomach dropped. Her eyes were pitch black, void of any whites, and her mouth stretched into an unnatural grin that split her face wide. Carter stumbled backward, drawing his weapon. "Stay where you are!" The woman took a step toward him, her movements jerky and unnatural. The chase Carter fired a warning shot into the air, but the sound didn't faze her. She lunged forward with inhuman speed, and Carter turned and ran. Branches whipped against his face as he sprinted through the forest, his flashlight bouncing wildly in his hand. The whispers grew louder, now a cacophony of voices calling his name. He burst out of the woods and onto the highway, his chest heaving. His cruiser was in sight, its lights still flashing. Carter threw himself into the driver's seat and locked the doors, his hands trembling as he fumbled for the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I need backup on Route 23. There's something out here." The radio crackled, but there was no response. "Dispatch, do you copy?" he shouted. A soft tapping sound drew his attention. Carter looked up to see the woman standing outside his window, her black eyes staring in. The vanishing Carter slammed the car into reverse, but the engine sputtered and died. The woman's face pressed against the glass, her grin widening impossibly. The last thing Carter remembered was the sound of shattering glass. When the backup officers arrived 2 hours later, they found Carter's cruiser parked on the side of the road. The driver's side window was broken, and the interior was covered in frost, as though the temperature inside had dropped below freezing. Carter was gone. His radio was still transmitting faintly, repeating the same phrase over and over. "Route 23 is not safe. Turn back." Officer Diana Hayes was one of the youngest recruits on the police force in Millwood, a quiet suburban town surrounded by dense woods. Though new to the job, she had quickly earned respect for her sharp instincts and fearless approach to law enforcement. On an otherwise uneventful Friday night, she was dispatched to investigate a 911 call that would forever mark her name in Millwood's dark history. The call came from a frantic woman who claimed that someone, or something, was trying to break into her home on Briar Hollow Road, a desolate stretch on the outskirts of town. "It's watching me from the tree line," the woman whispered before the line cut out. Hayes grabbed her flashlight, holstered her weapon, and headed out. As she drove, a chill crept through her, not from the cold, but from the heavy silence that seemed to hang over the empty streets. The house on Briar Hollow. The address led her to an old Victorian house at the edge of a wooded area. The front door was ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. Hayes parked her cruiser in the gravel driveway and radioed in. "Dispatch, this is Officer Hayes. I'm at the location on Briar Hollow. Doors open, possible forced entry. I'm going to check it out." "Copy that, Officer Hayes. Be careful," the dispatcher replied. Hayes approached the house cautiously, her flashlight illuminating the cracked steps and peeling paint. "Millwood Police Department. Is anyone inside?" she called out. The house was eerily quiet. Hayes stepped into the dimly lit hallway, her boots echoing on the wooden floor. The air smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic. "Hello? Ma'am? Are you here?" She moved through the rooms, finding nothing but overturned furniture and scattered belongings. It looked as though someone had left in a hurry. The basement door. In the kitchen, Hayes found a trail of dark, sticky droplets leading to a door at the far end of the room. Her stomach tightened as she realized the trail led to the basement. She pushed the door open, revealing a narrow staircase, descending into darkness. A faint noise drifted up, a rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking on wood. "Hello?" Hayes called, gripping her flashlight tightly. The tapping stopped. Hayes hesitated for a moment before descending the stairs. Each creak of the wooden steps seemed louder than the last. At the bottom, her flashlight revealed a large, unfinished basement filled with cobwebs and dust. In the center of the room stood a single wooden chair. It was empty, but something about it made her skin crawl. She turned to leave, but a voice stopped her in her tracks. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice in the dark haze whipped around, her flashlight scanning the room. There was no one there. "Who's there? Show yourself," she demanded, drawing her weapon. The voice came again, but this time it was different, deeper, colder. "It's too late now." Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut, plunging the room into complete darkness. Hayes' flashlight flickered and went out. "Dispatch! I need backup at Briar Hollow. I'm trapped in the basement," she shouted into her radio, but all she got was static. A faint light began to glow in the corner of the room. Hayes turned toward it, her heart pounding. The light grew brighter, revealing a figure standing in the shadows. It was the woman from the 911 call, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. "Help me," the woman whispered. Before Hayes could respond, the woman's body jerked violently, as though pulled by an invisible force, and she vanished into thin air. Go the forest. The next thing Hayes knew, she was standing outside, the basement door nowhere in sight. She was in the woods, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Her radio crackled. "Hayes! Hayes! Dispatch? Is that you?" she asked, but the voice that responded wasn't the dispatcher. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice said again, sending a chill down her spine. Hayes started walking, her flashlight barely penetrating the thick darkness. The woods seemed alive, with shadows shifting and branches rustling, though there was no wind. A distant sound caught her attention. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming closer. She drew her weapon and turned in the direction of the noise. "Stop! Show yourself!" she shouted. The footsteps stopped. The vanishing Hayes spun around, her flashlight darting from tree to tree, but the forest seemed to close in on her. Panic set in as she realized she couldn't find her way back to the house. Then, from behind her, came the voice again. "It's too late now." She turned to see a figure standing just a few feet away. It wasn't the woman this time. It was something else. Its face was featureless, its body shrouded in shadows that seemed to writhe like smoke. Hayes fired her weapon, but the bullets had no effect. The figure advanced, and everything went black. The aftermath. When officers arrived at the house on Briar Hollow the next morning, they found Hayes's cruiser parked in the driveway, its engine still running. The house itself was empty, with no sign of the 911 caller or Hayes. In the basement, they discovered her flashlight lying on the floor, still switched on. Next to it was her radio, emitting a faint, garbled message. "You shouldn't have come here." Hayes was never seen again. Locals say that on quiet nights, you can still hear her voice calling for help on the police radio, forever trapped in the woods of Briar Hollow. Officer Lucas Rhodes had always been a skeptic. He had heard all the local legends about the cursed stretch of highway just outside of Crestwood, but he didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural occurrences. To him, they were just stories told by bored residents on a Friday night. It was his last shift of the week, and he was already thinking about the weekend when the call came in. Unit 12. We've received a report of strange activity near the old highway bridge. Could be a stranded motorist. Can you check it out? Roger that, dispatch. I'm on it, Rhodes responded. The bridge in question was an old, dilapidated structure. It had been the site of several accidents over the years, but nothing ever serious, at least not officially. Locals, however, whispered about sightings of ghostly figures walking along the bridge at night, and it was often referred to as the Phantom Bridge. Rhodes had laughed it off in the past, but as he drove toward the bridge that night, something felt off. The bridge roads arrived at the bridge at around 2:30 a.m. The fog was thick, wrapping around the bridge like a blanket. The headlights of his cruiser barely pierced the mist. He stopped just before the entrance and looked around, seeing nothing but the silhouette of the bridge and the eerie stillness that seemed to hang in the air. Dispatch, I'm at the bridge. No sign of anyone or anything unusual. As he stepped out of the cruiser, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. There was no sound, no rustling leaves, no distant howls from coyotes, just an unsettling silence. He approached the bridge slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel as he walked. When he reached the center of the bridge, he froze. There, standing in the middle, was a man dressed in an old-fashioned uniform, the kind Rhodes had seen in photographs from the early 1900s. The man's face was pale, his eyes dark and hollow. "Hey, are you okay?" Rhodes called, stepping forward. The figure didn't move. Rhodes felt a shiver of unease as he took another step closer. He called out again, but the man remained still. Suddenly the figure's head jerked to the side, as if something had snapped inside it. The movement was unnatural, and Rhodes instinctively reached for his gun. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Rhodes demanded. The man turned toward him, his eyes wide and unblinking. "You don't belong here," the man said in a voice that sounded like it came from miles away. The Chase Rhodes' heart raced, and every instinct in his body screamed for him to run. But before he could turn to leave, the man lunged at him, moving with a speed that no human should have been capable of. Rhodes barely had time to react. He fired his gun in a panic, but the bullets passed through the figure as if it were made of smoke. In a blind panic, Rhodes ran back toward his cruiser, his heart pounding in his chest. He glanced over his shoulder, but the man wasn't following him. In fact, the bridge had gone silent again, as though nothing had happened at all. But as he reached his car, Rhodes looked back to see the figure standing on the bridge, staring at him with those lifeless eyes. "Turn around, officer. It's too late," the figure called out. Rhodes spun around and slammed his foot on the gas pedal, speeding away from the bridge with his lights flashing. The man's words echoed in his mind. He tried to shake it off as adrenaline, but a part of him knew that something was very wrong. The return. The next morning, Rhodes was assigned to a routine patrol shift. The strange encounter on the bridge gnawed at him, but he didn't mention it to anyone. He kept his distance from the bridge for the next few days, but the thought of what had happened wouldn't leave his mind. A few nights later, while patrolling the same stretch of road, he found himself driving back toward the bridge. It was as if an invisible force was guiding him there. Rhodes slowed down as he approached, the fog rolling in thick again. His cruiser came to a stop right at the entrance. The bridge looked the same as it had the night he first saw the man. Against his better judgment, Rhodes stepped out of the car and approached the bridge once again. This time, there was no figure standing in the middle. Instead, something worse, something more terrifying, was waiting for him. As he stepped onto the bridge, he felt an oppressive weight settle over him, like he was being watched. The hairs on his neck stood up once more, and his breath came in shallow gasps. The air grew cold, impossibly cold. He could see his breath fogging in front of him as he reached the center of the bridge. Suddenly he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. When he turned, no one was there. The footsteps grew louder, closer. His heart thudded in his chest as he spun around again. This time, there was a figure standing at the far end of the bridge, staring at him. It was the same man, but now his face was twisted in a grotesque, unnatural grin, his hollow eyes glowing in the dim light. "Turn around, officer. You shouldn't have come back." The disappearance Rhodes ran again, but the figure followed him, moving faster than any man should. His gun was in his hand, but as he tried to fire, the bullets seemed to have no effect. The figure reached out and touched him, and Rhodes felt an ice-cold chill seeping into his bones. He stumbled, dizzy, unable to keep his balance. In that moment, everything went black. When Rhodes woke up, he was back in his cruiser, parked on the side of the road, as if nothing had happened. The bridge was in the distance, shrouded in fog. His radio crackled. "Unit 12, come in." "Unit 12, do you copy?" He grabbed the radio, his hands shaking. "This is Officer Rhodes. I was on the bridge and something happened." "Officer, where are you? We haven't heard from you in hours. Are you okay?" Rhodes looked around, his mind racing. He had no memory of how he had ended up in the car. He glanced at his watch. Hours had passed, but the time didn't make sense. He turned back toward the bridge, and then he saw it, standing at the edge of the fog. The figure was still there, watching him. Rhodes floored the gas pedal and sped off. He never spoke of what happened on that bridge again. Some say he was haunted by the phantom. Others say he disappeared, just like the others before him. But no one knows for sure. What is known, however, is that no officer has ever returned to the bridge since that night.